The movie opens with a young man in Japan who just murdered a couple of elderly people in wheelchairs and crutches walking in the corridors of a caring facility for elderly people. He cleans up himself, goes downstairs while holding his gun, and writes a suicide note. He states that he is doing his country a great service by getting rid of elderly people who are draining the economy. He claims that his actions are also making the lives of the elderly, who he believes do not want to burn the young generation. When he concludes the letter, he points a shotgun at himself and pulls the trigger. Following this hate crime against the elderly, the Japanese government has passed a bill called Plan 75, which helps facilitate the death of all citizens aged 65 and above. The bill was also a response to address the community's demand for drastic actions regarding the critical issues of the world's most rapidly aging country. The procedure helps the elderly experience a painless death, and it is not going to be forced on the elderly people. Rather, the choice will be given to them. Although many protested against the bill, it is now officially underway. People are hired and registration has been going. Some people make the choice not to be a burden and go through this process, but others do it because they can no longer afford to work and live their life independently. Michi Kakutani and Inekomaki are both elders who work at a hotel as maids who have a group of their own where they discuss their social lives while eating apples. But lately, Ineko has been struggling with pain and Michi tells her to get checked. Michi lives alone in her small apartment. After she gets home, she checks her mailbox, has dinner, and cuts her nails. This was her daily routine. But she has received some sad news. The hotel has decided to let her go because customers were complaining about seeing elderly people working a hard labor job, which made them sad. At Plan 75, an enthusiastic member of the company named Hiromu Okabe gives an orientation to an elderly woman who came to get registered. The government gives a $1,000 preparation fund for elderly people who register, which may be used to arrange funerals, have a meal, or anything the people want for their last days. There is also a group plan package for people who don't want to feel lonely. There is a group cremation or burial. Getting registered for the process is very easy. It doesn't require a doctor's approval, and no health inspections are performed. The woman happily registers after hearing this criteria. In another part of Japan, a Filipino immigrant named Maria, who has a family to take care of, is seen working at an elderly care center. She gets a phone call from her family about the deteriorating health of her daughter, who requires immediate heart surgery. At a hospital, Ineko and Michi are both sitting together while Ineko gets her blood pressure checked. Ineko doesn't like this place because getting sick means being out of work, and she feels like she is holding on to life by a thread. Michi has decided to use the Plan 75 service, and she waits her turn to fill the forms. Michi registers accompanied by her friends, and they discuss the luxury services of an impending resort vacation filled with excitement. This vacation was affordable due to the preparation fund given by the government. Their conversation quickly turns into where they would want to die. Everyone expresses their opinion, but Ineko sits quietly with looks of concern on her face. Later, Michi takes Ineko shopping and pays for her expenses. She invites her to her home as a guest. While lying on their bed, they have a conversation about their children. Ineko has never seen her grandchildren and feels lonely. Michi consoles her, saying everyone is alone in this life, and holds her hand. The next day, Hiromu is seen checking out different hand supports that are going to be mounted on public sitting chairs. He continues working until night for his company and believes in its cause. At night, he is seen registering another male elderly person for the Plan 75 service. While the man fills the forms, he sympathetically looks at a couple of elderly people across his desk who are gathered to eat out in the cold night. Meanwhile, Michi spends her last days at the hotel working, and Maria attends a church service with Filipino members. After the service, while the people at the church were gathered for a meal, the leader of the church made the chatting quiet and gave Maria the stage to speak. Maria tells them about her daughter's heart surgery and shows them the picture. A donation box is circulated, and she gets some money in her hands. Later, another church member finds Maria and informs her about a job offer by the Plan 75 service. Maria agrees because she needs the money. At Plan 75, Hiromu gets another elderly customer, but this time it was his uncle Yukio Okabe, who just turned 75 and had not seen his nephew in 20 years, who came to apply for this service. At first, his uncle didn't know it was Hiromu, but later they got reacquainted and went through the process with a visible awkwardness between them. Later, Hiromu's boss asks him if he's okay with taking this case. Hiromu pauses, but before he can respond, His colleague tells him that he cannot do this task because he is a very close blood relative. So, Hiromu decides to give his case to his other colleague, Sakurai. At the hotel, Michi and her friends are given a good farewell by their young co-workers. While taking their belongings out of the lockers, Michi and her friends discuss what is next for them. One of them is offered by her daughter to babysit her grandchild in exchange for a payment. Michi, on the other hand, doesn't have any relatives to depend on, so she plans to find a new job. It is also revealed that Ineko just got out of hospital after being admitted when she fainted at her workplace. Ineko is alone like Michi, and there is nobody who can help her. These elderly ladies are angry at the customers who filed a complaint, which was the reason for losing their jobs in the first place. Michi goes to her home and she is given a notice of termination of her service at the hotel. Her tenants will soon see this notice, so she has to find a new job immediately. She called Ineko to check up on her, but there was no answer. Then she goes to another agency to find herself a new place to live, but the tenants don't want to rent their place to an elderly person who doesn't have a job. After telling her he couldn't do anything more for her, he returned her applications. At last she tries her luck on the internet. She repeatedly filled out different forms, but no jobs were appearing on the screen. She complained to the internet service provider, but it was not the problem of the internet. After trying one more place, Michi returns to her place and calls her friend. She tells her she couldn't find a job because of her age, and asks her maybe if she could get her the babysitting job, but her friend tells her another person has already taken the job. Michi hangs up the phone after her friend tells her she is having dinner. Eventually, Michi managed to find a job, but it was very hard for a woman of her age. She is hired as a traffic controller and spends a long time standing. The next day, Maria goes to her new job and gets a tour of the planned 75 workspaces along with other workers on her first day. She is assigned to a section where elderly people with no family are cremated. One body will be given to 2 people who will take care of the process. The supervisor gives them one instruction: the process will be completed with no talking. She sees one body through a glass and gets a little scared. After work, Maria meets with a friend, a woman from her country with 3 kids, and is amazed by the fact that the woman can handle such pressure, while Maria finds life in Japan to be a struggle. Meanwhile, Michi, who is now in her new apartment, calls her friend Ineko, but there was still no answer, so she goes to her home and finds her dead on a table. This was very shocking for her. In another place in Japan, Hiromu goes to visit his uncle Yukio. He arrives at the home and finds it empty, but when he is about to return, he sees his uncle collecting trash somewhere in the neighborhood. So he gets back inside and waits for him. Hiromu is very sad to see his uncle in such living conditions. When Hiromu asks him about a blood donation card he found at the place, his uncle tells him that he received it in Nagasaki, where he was a part of building a bridge project. Hiromu finds other cards from other cities as well. This meant Yuko spent his entire life going from one project to another, doing a labor job. He opens his windows and brings some eggs to cook dinner. Hiromu is surprised to see his uncle bring eggs from outside. His uncle tells him he does this to keep the eggs cold. Hiromu helps his uncle in the kitchen, and while they are cooking, they speak about Hiromu's mother. Hiromu tells him she remarried a long time ago before his father passed away from his illness. Yuko takes a seat while Hiromu finishes up the work in the kitchen and watches the news on the TV about Plan 75 service. It has now been 3 years since it was launched, and it has given rise to various private sector businesses, generating about $10 billion a year. Now the government is considering lowering the eligibility age, which was 75 previously. Hiromu leaves his uncle's place, and his uncle waves at him sadly. Back at Michi's place, she mourns the death of her friend, sitting alone at her place. She looks exhausted, and now she has nobody since all her friends are now gone after leaving the hotel. She decides to go to the welfare consultation service and sits alone outside while others are having dinner. Suddenly, Hiromu comes to her and gives her a hot soup, which she is grateful for, but she is sad at the same time because she is used to providing for herself. Then she goes home and reads the paper she received at the service. She gets a call from Yoko Naramaya, a Plan 70 worker who has been assigned to help her get through the process. At the Plan 75 center, Maria continues to do her job. She is seen taking the belongings of a dead person off the body and transferring them to another room. Another elderly man is seen taking some of the materials for himself, and he gives her some of the stuff, but she refuses to accept it, thinking it was stealing from the dead. But the old man tells her that dead people have no use for it, and the living should use it so that it doesn't go to waste. So she accepts a watch and takes it for herself. Next, Michi is seen talking to Yoko on the phone while sitting in her house. Every caller is given 15 minutes to speak with their assistant, and Michi speaks to Yoko about her past life. Michi was a married woman once. The marriage was arranged by parents and she could not refuse. She spent her days running around for the business of her family, which made things difficult and made her think of running away. But she couldn't do it because she was pregnant with her child. She lost the baby because the umbilical cord was wrapped around the neck, which was a simple problem that could have been prevented with today's medical technology. Before she could continue her story, the alarm sound started ringing, which meant her 15 minutes were up. Just when Yoko was about to hang up after informing her of the next date of their session, Michi asks her for a favor. Michi and Yoko meet face to face at a bowling alley. Michi thanks Yoko for agreeing to meet her, although the call center assistants are forbidden to get close to the elders they are assigned to. Then she gives her some money for coming and talking to her. Yoko refuses initially, but later accepts it when Michi tells her that she has $1,000, which she doesn't use much. In their conversation, it is revealed that Michi was married a second time after divorcing from her first husband. She used to come to the bowling alley they sat in. After talking for a while, Yoko goes bowling as Michi watches her having fun. Yoko plays for some time and invites Michi to try. Michi holds the ball with both her hands and tries. She doesn't get it right the first time, but on her second try, she knocks all the pins. Everyone at the bowling alley cheers for her, and Michi is seen happier than she has ever been. But not everyone can forget the sorrows life brings in life. Maria's job is taking a toll on her as she has to see the death of people every single day. She falls asleep while she's at work, and she sees her daughter sitting on one of the beds at the Plan 75 service center. Hirumo, on the other hand, continues his hard work at the Plan 75 center. He arrives very early at his desk outside and organizes his materials. While he posts advertisements about the procedure, protesters who are passing throw coffee at the board, which leads him to inform his superiors about this incident. There was also another problem. There was a breakdown at the crematorium, and Hirumo had to tell the people who had an appointment to reschedule for another day. He is forced to stay up all night, and he researches an industrial waste disposal company that also removes the ashes of cremated people. Next, Yoko's at the call center, and she's on the phone with Michi, who tells her about ordering sushi from a store. This was a first-time experience for Michi, and she is excited about it. The alarm is heard and the time is up, but before she hangs up, Yoko has something to say to Michi. Yoko has grown to like Michi, and she doesn't want Yoko to go through the service. Although Yoko was very emotional about Michi's procedure, she tried to speak professionally and told Michi that there was an option that allowed the participants to cancel the procedure if they had changed their minds. Michi tells her that she has decided to go through the procedure. Yoko tells her to leave her doors unlocked because an official from the Plan 75 services will come to her building to make the final arrangements with her landlord. Michi expresses her appreciation to Yoko for all the time she spent with her. She tells her that she was happy during their chats, and she will be always grateful for taking the time to see her. Both Michi and Yoko were very emotional during the phone call. After saying her goodbyes, Michi hangs up the phone. After a while, Yoko, who is still emotional about the conversation, calls Michi using her phone, but there is no answer. Michi had already disconnected the line. She puts the telephone inside a bag and prepares the rest of her belongings. She has come to terms with her death and doesn't want anyone to interfere with her decision. At the call center, Yoko sits alone during break time. Not far from where she was sitting, her co-workers talked about their callers. The callers are usually in their 70s or 80s. Most of them are lonely, and they appreciate the people who talk to them. Yoko hears one of her co-workers advising the rest not to let the elderly people back out of the process. Yoko was getting very angry at the co-worker who keeps saying such things. While her co-workers kept talking, Yoko kept thinking about her time with Michi. The next morning, Michi wakes up in her empty house. She gets ready as she's about to have to visit the Plan 75 service center. She goes outside to enjoy the fresh breath of air for the last time. She leaves her door open and goes out of her house. She sees a young girl jumping ropes. After staring at her for some time, she leaves the place and takes a bus to the Plan 75 center. She quietly kept thinking as the bus kept going. At the same time, Hiromu picks up his uncle, who was also registered for the Plan 75 procedures. They go to a restaurant and enjoy their meal, and Hiromu suggests drinking sake, which his uncle enjoys. Although Hiromu didn't admit he felt some connection with his uncle the last time his boss asked him, he is starting to get nervous at the idea of losing his only uncle to a procedure he primarily advocates for. On their way back from the restaurant, Yukio gets sick and starts vomiting. Hiromu asks him if he wants to cancel the procedure, but Yukio told him that he would like to proceed. After he gets better, they continue the journey. Yukio and Hiromu speak with each other about their family. Yukio had not spoken to Hiromu's father when he was alive. Yukio asks Hiromu if his father is still angry at him, but Hiromu told him his father missed him a lot. Yukio sees a lot of his brother in Hiromu. After reaching the center, both Yukio and Hiromu sit in silence. Then Yukio gets out of the car and walks towards the center, without saying anything to his nephew. Hiromu could do nothing except watch his uncle go through the process. Meanwhile, Michi has already reached the center and begun the process. After scanning Michi's wristband, the nurse gives her medicine to help her against nausea. Then she puts some sort of detector on her finger and asks her to lie down. She is given a chemical agent, using an oxygen mask covering her nose and mouth. In the middle of the procedure, the nurse gets a call about the problem on the cremation machine. Something urgent has come up and the nurse leaves right away. But Michi, who was in the middle of the procedure, turned to her right and saw Yukio, who was under the same procedure. He slowly begins to open his eyes and Michi gets frightened after seeing someone dying. While all this was going on, Hirumo, who was on his way back after his uncle left, couldn't shake all the emotions he was feeling. He turns around his car and gets back to the Plan 75 center. Then he entered the building, but the building was empty and there was no one at the reception. So he goes to the patient's room, where he slowly walks past some dead bodies and reaches the place where his uncle and Michi are lying. He comes face to face with Michi, who is now sitting on the bed. They stare at each other while Michi takes the breathing mask off her face. He goes to his uncle and tries to wake him. He checks his pulse and finds out he is already too late. Hiromu is sad but doesn't want to leave his uncle at this facility. Due to the problem at the crematorium, his uncle will not get buried in time unless he does something about it. While he tries to lift Yukio's body, Maria, who is going door to door removing the patient's belongings, spots him. She helps him take his uncle's body outside using a hospital bed, and Hiromu leaves the facility without anyone detecting him. Maria gets back to her job and goes to the room where the different belongings of patients are sorted. When searching for different belongings, she was shocked to find a large sum of money in one of the bags. Meanwhile, Hiromu calls private centers that have crematoriums. He finds only one center and he has to make it within an hour. He starts speeding and gets caught by a traffic police, who takes his license and registration, making him wait while he stares at his uncle's body. Michi walks out of the facility and reaches some place where the sunset is visible. The movie ends while she sings her favorite song while watching the sunset.